There is something about it that just makes it feel like you got sucker punched in the face. One of the most horribly depressing things I think I've ever read. It's weird, it's gross, it's ugly, it's horrific. I'm gonna try to not cry on the internet. How the f did you come up with this? Oh boy. Hi, I'm Sam. There's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but it has been quite a while since I have updated you guys on what I've been reading, so I thought I would share some gems that I read this summer and fall. All of these are remarkable in some way, and thus I will be remarking on them. So the first two I'll talk about are two from the Penguin Modern box set. So I read John Steinbeck's The Vigilante, which starts out with the titular short story, The Vigilante, and then has two others, and then Wendell Berry's Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer. So I'll start with The Vigilante. I had read Steinbeck before, so I was aware of how much I liked his writing style. I'm not a big short story collection person though, so I really didn't like the other stories. I really only liked The Vigilante. The Vigilante follows a white man immediately after he has participated in a mob lynching of a black man, and we're just following him sort of as he's coming down off of the high emotions of being part of a mob that literally commits an act of killing another human being, and then kind of his thought process after that event, and honestly kind of his emotional process as well. So I found it to be so interesting. I haven't read most of John Steinbeck, but I have read him before, but I think his real strength, at least from what I've seen so far, is that I don't think he's doing anything super fancy or over the top or flowery with his writing, but there is something about it that just makes it feel like you got sucker punched in the face. And I like that. So I would recommend this, but yeah, I really only liked The Vigilante. The other stories were The Snake and The Chrysanthemums. Forgettable. And then Wendell Berry's Why I'm Not Going to Buy a Computer. I've only read Wendell Berry's nonfiction. I had to read a lot of it for my undergraduate studies, and I'd never read this essay. So it starts out with this short letter to a newspaper, kind of back in the day when computers were becoming more common in middle class homes. And yeah, he just wrote this very simple letter about how he didn't plan on buying a computer. He wanted to focus on manually doing it with his hands because he felt that it was important for his craft and, among other things. And then really the bulk of this is actually his response to this overwhelming outpouring of angry letters that the newspaper received in response to Wendell Berry's letter. So I'll just read you a couple nuggets from his responses. The past was gloomy, drudgery-ridden, servile, meaningless, and slow. The present, thanks only to purchasable products, is meaningful, bright, lively, centralized, and fast. The future, thanks only to more purchasable products, is going to be even better. Thus, consumers become salesmen, and the world is made safer for corporations. A computer, I am told, offers a kind of help that you can't get from other humans. A computer will help you write faster, easier, and more. For a while, it seemed to me that every university professor I met told me this. Do I then want to write faster, easier, and more? No. My standards are not speed, ease, and quantity. If you're interested in nonfiction that grapples with industrialization, progress, and the cost of it, and sort of the commercialization of technology, and how technological progress isn't always better, you could read this short little essay. Okay, total tone shift, because I contain multitudes. I also read Superdimensional Love Gun by Shintaro Kago. I cannot show any of the inside of this. I can't give you an idea of the art style because this is just the most grotesque, disturbing stuff. I think Shintaro Kago gets compared to Junji Ito often because Junji Ito has, sort of broken into the mainstream in some ways and is a lot more accessible, I would say. But Shintaro Kago's stuff is a lot more disturbing, a lot more just downright weird. It's like, how the f did you come up with this? And then after coming up with it, why did you write it down on a piece of paper? So yeah, this is a short story collection. One of them is about a group of people who, well, no, I can't talk about that one. But yeah, all of these stories are definitely erotic, grotesque. We are twisting the human form in grotesque ways. And I know Junji Ito does that a lot, but I'm never cringing and feeling like I have to look away from Junji Ito's, because Junji Ito deforms the human body in a way that's almost aesthetically pleasing, and there's still something so beautiful about it. Shintaro Kago, it's not beautiful. It makes you want to peel off all your skin and die. It's weird, it's gross, it's ugly, it's horrific, but I I liked it. I don't recommend it, but I liked it. Next we have Loner by Teddy Wayne. This is a library book, but I enjoyed it very much, and I will definitely be getting my own copy. This is about a man, like super incel energy from the East Coast, and he is starting his freshman year at Harvard University in the United States. And yeah, he sucks. He sucks so bad. He's just like so entitled, thinks like he's the smartest person who's ever graced the entire earth. And at like orientation, he becomes fixated on this woman named Veronica. And he sees in her that she's also kind of a loner and she's like him. So he pretty much starts stalking her. He starts dating her roommate to get closer to her, follows her around, and then kind of like weasels himself into her life. That's kind of all I'll say, because I don't want to give away too much, but definitely if you like reading from the point of view of an incel, which now that I say that, I don't know why you would, but I, for some reason, kind of do. I don't know, there's just like something so interesting about reading from the point of view of someone who's so delusional. Well, said my mother, surveying the room, this is exciting. I wish I were starting college again. All the interesting courses and people. And I bet you'll be beating the girls off with a stick, my father added. There are a lot of late bloomers here. My mother scowled. Why would you say something like that? I'm just saying he'll find his tribe, he turned to me. You'll have a great time here, he said, with the hollow brightness of an appliance manual, congratulating you on your purchase. If I look different from my Facebook photo, it's because I got braces again last week, he said. But just for 6 months, or 5 3/4 now. All hopes I had of a roommate who would help upgrade me to a higher social stratum snagged on the gleaming barnacles of Stephen's orthodontia. I almost wish I belonged to a marginalized community so I'd have a safe space for all occasions, I said. The whole world is your safe space, she snapped. Not true. I shopped a feminism class and didn't feel particularly welcome there. So yeah, that gives you an idea of how much this guy sucks. It was uncomfy and awkward and cringy to read from his perspective, but I still had a really good time with it. And you should read it if you want. We All Rot Eventually by Mia Ballard is a horror novella about a woman named Alexa who is trying to break out and become an actress in LA in 2005. She is struggling to find work, and just when she thinks that she's gonna have to give up and move back home, her on-again, off-again boyfriend dies. Suddenly, the roles start rolling in. So she thinks that her success hinges on committing acts of violence, and she pursues that darker path to become successful and to become sort of the most famous actress in the world. So this was very gory, fun, had kind of good for her energy, but she did kind of suck. I didn't like it as much as Shy Girl, I will say. I feel like Shy Girl, as Mia Ballard's most recent publication, I can definitely see her growth as a writer. This does feel a little less successful, but not in such a way where I'd be like, I wouldn't recommend you read this, but for sure, Shy Girl is Mia Ballard's best yet. And this, I can kind of still see her finding her feet under her as a horror writer. But this was a lot of fun. It's short, so if you were interested, you could read this too. 10 Days in a Madhouse by Nellie Bly is a nonfiction account of this reporter named Nellie Bly who went undercover in a New York City insane asylum and documented what she saw and experienced. So I was expecting this to be really intense and pretty disturbing, but honestly I feel like the accounts of abuse and like her experience, it all felt very shallow and surface level. I think like anyone watching right now, just like think of what an insane asylum was like for women in 1887. Not good. I don't know, I just didn't find it to be that compelling or interesting or good, honestly. I wanted it to be, but I don't know, if this is something you've been considering reading, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it. Hauntress by minetaro mochizuki is a newly published horror manga about a man who starts to be stalked by this really tall, creepy-looking woman who definitely seems like she's based on the Japanese urban legend. I think it's like the slit-faced woman. Basically, they just have like a really big smile, and it's like almost like the Joker, where they have like the corners of their mouths have been cut so that their smile is a lot bigger. I thought this was really great. I thought it was very freaky deaky and fun. I thought the art was creepy. And I didn't know, but apparently this was like the first story to introduce the concept of stalking into the Japanese horror lexicon. And I think it was very successful. So I think I would definitely recommend it if any of that sounds interesting to you. Farsickness by Joshua Mohr, I think was a recommendation from a subscriber. on one of my weird and disturbing recommendations videos. So this is about an Afghan war veteran named Hal who begins to hear a voice in his head telling him that he has to go home to a castle in Scotland that he's never actually been to. He follows this voice, and what ensues is a very like Alice in Wonderland-esque journey. This reminded me a lot of The Hike by Drew Magary, although I don't think that this was quite as successful. There were a lot of aspects about this that I did really like the illustrations. I think are done by his daughter, and they are present throughout. And I think that they kind of add to the sort of like whimsical, uncanny tone of the story. One of the inscriptions in this book says, "I wish this book was in hotel rooms instead of Bibles." So that was definitely something that compelled me to pick it up. It feels like a good day, though maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is a bad day. I can't remember. That's the strangest thing I've ever admitted. I can't cite specifics from the stash of yesterdays that can be sorted in batches of good or bad, but I can imagine, and I'd like to, that when you are in the middle of a good day, there is at least a moment when you shut your eyes and tilt your face toward the sun. I want to remember my life, and these fists of joy. They feel beautiful. Have you ever been hammered on by fists of joy? I fight the urge to cry. This is the greatest beating I've ever taken. Violence, for the right reason, is one of the most loving things you can do for another person. So yeah, I think that there were definitely some funny, poignant parts of this, and there is one section at the end that had me tearing up a little bit. So if you are interested in books about dealing with post-war PTSD, you might like this book. Several People Are Typing is about a man who gets trapped inside his work's Slack channel. So basically like their work messaging system, he somehow gets trapped inside of it. So this is very much like Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, where he sort of becomes this entity that can no longer effectively communicate and like be a human. This is very funny. This has been recommended to me for years, and it definitely lived up to the hype. I don't work in corporate US, so I don't use Slack, but I think even as like someone who's on the outside of this kind of story, I found it to be really funny. So if you're someone who works in a company where you have to constantly be on this kind of like messaging system talking to your coworkers, I think you'd probably find it even funnier and more relatable. The entire book is told through like Slack messages, so it reads really fast. It's a lot of fun. I would recommend it. I think you should read it. I Love Shopping by Lauren Cook is a lot like their book Sex Goblin, which I loved. It's just sort of these like little vignettes, random thoughts that they had. Not really an overarching story. It's mostly just like vibes. It almost reads like poetry sometimes, but there's just something so interesting and hilarious about Lauren Cook's voice. My crazy idea is that evolutionarily, there is some benefit to being materialistic because something developed in our brains to make us enjoy acquiring objects because of hunting and gathering. Like it would be an evolutionary benefit to enjoy collecting objects because we have to collect food and feel attracted to food in the same way animals are. So we like shopping because shopping replaced foraging. Just a theory though. Forgot I had a freaking Diet Cola back there. On New Year's Eve of 2014 to 2015, I saw Lindsay Lohan in Chinatown. It was a good year. She was in a black SUV and I was on the sidewalk and she had her window rolled down. On New Year's Eve of 2016 to 2017, I saw a raccoon eating persimmons out of a tree in someone's backyard. Both of these things feel the same to me and mean the same thing. My stepdad yells at me for denting my car and calls me irresponsible. I say, hey man, the difference between me and you is I can love something even though it is ugly. Takopi's Original Sin by Taizan 5 is one of the most horribly depressing things I think I've ever read. For sure, one of the most horribly depressing things I've read this year. Yeah, a lot of content warnings for this one. This is about a happy little alien who looks like a little octopus that lands on Earth with the objective of making people happy. And he happens to meet this little girl named Shizuka, who is in elementary school. And she is getting so ruthlessly bullied and abused and neglected that basically Takopi is like trying to keep her from ending her own life. This is obviously supernatural. There are elements of time travel. Takopi has these little gadgets that he is supposed to use to help bring happiness to humans. So he's sort of trying everything he possibly can to make Shizuka happy, sort of fruitlessly, since her life is so miserable, and even as a young child, she's sort of already developed this extremely nihilistic point of view. This does take a turn, kind of like halfway through, where you then also start to learn more about the villain and her backstory. It's really good. It's really messed up and disturbing and bleak, but I still had a really good time with it, and I was like bawling my eyes out by the end of it. So take that information as you will. Okay, the last one I've been putting off talking about because this book made me cry real tears. That is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. I've heard a lot of people talk about how this book basically feels like it's two separate books. Part 1 and Part 2 feel so tonally different. And while I do agree that the tone definitely shifts, I'm on board. I'm on board with it. Part 1 really reads as like millennial woman writing comical tweets about her observations. And then Part 2 is this woman dealing with family issues. Specifically, her sister is pregnant and they realize that the baby has this like rare congenital disorder and her chances of surviving are basically 0 once she is born. So it's the family sort of dealing with that, processing that, and trying to enjoy what time they have with the baby before her inevitable death. I'll start with reading some of the funny, happy parts, and then I do want to read you some of the sad parts, but I'm gonna try to not cry on the internet. It was a mistake to believe that other people were not living as deeply as you were. Besides, you were not even living that deeply. On a slow news day, we hung suspended from meat hooks, dangling over the abyss. On a fast news day, it was like we had swallowed all of NASCAR and were about to crash into the wall. Either way, it felt like something a dude named Randy was in charge of. Okay, now I'm gonna get into the sad stuff. If you don't want to hear me reading quotations about loss, grief, anything to do with like pregnancy, having a baby, if you have any sort of like, baby anxiety, I totally understand if you have to skip ahead. So I'm gonna put a little timestamp for you to skip to if that would make you feel comfortable. But I do want to share these portions with you because that is really what cinched it for me as a 5-star. Oh boy. When the neurologist in that first ever meeting had said gently that maybe the baby would one day be able to count to 3, she almost turned the table over on her. Because who needed to count to 3? Look what counting to 3 had gotten us. I'm warning you. We can take her to the Cincinnati Zoo, she said, flashing on in the dark like a light bulb. We can put her in the double stroller with her oxygen tank on one side and wheel her through the crowds. And when we get to the elephant enclosure, we can wrap a finger around her finger and squeeze, to show her how the little ones hold on to their mothers. Yes, said her sister, looking like her very young self again for a moment, and bowed her head for such a long time that it seemed she was going to cry. We can also mourn Harambe. For whatever lives we lead, they do prepare us for these moments. The dog who had met and kissed the baby came to the nighttime visitation and laughed at the long line of mourners as they blew through the door. Animals are allowed? She asked the funeral director. Animals are allowed, he said, and told her that once a horse had come and was led up the aisle so he could nuzzle his owner for the last time, seeking among her face for sugar cubes, breathing the just-cut hay of her hair, still feeling in his body the hot red yes that jumped to her smallest commands. But let me go was now the order, and what the body said was no. Okay, I am so proud of myself for getting through that without crying, because when I finished this book, I was on a full flight, seated next to an aggressively canoodling couple that were feeding each other Cheez-Its, and they kept like looking at me sideways while I was just like trying to casually sob into my mask. So yeah, this book is funny, but it's also like heart-wrenching, brutally so. So I think you should read it. If you can. Okay guys, those are some highlights and lowlights of what I read this summer and fall. I figured I would give you guys a little update since I've been kind of MIA. I haven't been making videos, but I have been reading and doing other fun and cool stuff with my life. But I am planning on really cranking out a lot of videos for December. We're gonna have a book haul video coming very, very soon. We're gonna have a worst and best books of the year. I'm hoping to maybe squeak out another weird and disturbing book recs video before the end of the year as well. So we'll see. But I always find my YouTube drive and momentum, it starts at the very end of the year and then it usually goes through the spring. So it isn't until the summer where I'm like, oh, I can go outside again, that it usually kind of stalls a little. But anyway, you can like this video if you want. Comment, what are some books you have been reading and loving this summer and fall? Would love to hear from you. You could subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in whatever video I make next. Probably a big juicy book haul. Okay, love you. Bye.